Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in this video I will show you how to create a Bollinger Bands indicator from scratch. This will be very interesting exercise because Bollinger Bands indicator is based on standard deviation basically, and I will calculate that standard deviation without any built-in functions. So yeah, it will be fun. So firstly, let's discuss what a Bollinger Bands indicator is. You can see the indicator right here on my screen, and as you can see it consists of three lines. So let's start with the middle line because that's basically the easiest thing to calculate. So the middle line is basically an average price. So this is a moving average. So that will be very simple. And for the upper and lower band, these are multiplications of a standard deviation based on, yeah, I think I said it right. So these are standard deviations multiplied by some coefficient. So let's also check the input values. So the first is for the period. So this is basically how many values are used in the calculation process of Bollinger Bands. And then you have the deviations multiplier. So if I set it to 1, this is basically your standard deviation. And then we multiply that standard deviation by this multiplier. So 2.5 is initially, and it looks like this. So yeah, so I think it will be fun and a good exercise to do, because by recreating basically different indicators from scratch, it's just a good exercise to do. So yeah, let's get to it. So I will open my IDE, I will go to the YouTube folder, and I will create a new file of type custom indicator, and let's call it Bollinger Bands from scratch. And it will have two parameters. So the first one is the length, so this will be type of integer, and the initial value will be set to 20, and the second input parameter will be called deviation, or no deviation, let's call it multiplier. It will be type of double because it can be a decimal place basically, and it will be initial value of 2.5. So these are two input parameters that we need in order to create the Bollinger Bands indicator. So next, and here with the plots, we will need three plots. So the first one is the average value. Okay, so this is the line in the middle basically. Let's change the color, and then we have upper value and lower value. Okay, so this is for those lines above and below that average price. So let's click on finish, and we are good to go. So let me just make sure that we have the right size. Okay, we do. So yeah, so what I will start with is that I will just change these visualization parameters because I want to have a higher width of those lines. So let's just change these, and we are good to continue. So yeah, so what will be the first step? So the first step is that we need to initialize an array in which we will store price values. Okay, and then we will use these price values in order to calculate the average price and also the standard deviation. So this is the first step that we have to do. So let's create a double array, let's call it values, just values. Okay, and we won't specify any size of that array right now. That's because the size of this array will be, sorry, typo here, and the size will be the same as this length parameter. And since this length parameter will change based on the input, we can't like set it right here. So if I try to do something like this, okay, so I input the length variable in here, you will see that there is this invalid index value. So what I have to do is that I have to go on this onInit function, and I need to use this array size function. So array is values array, new size is length, and the reserve size is 0. So now I can use this values array. So let's continue. So on calculate function, I will create our main for loop. So static integer I is equal to length, and then I'll just do the for loop. So for I lower than rates total and I plus plus. So I will increase the I with each iteration by 1. So that's our main for loop, and we can work in this main for loop. So the first step, so step 1 is get price values and store them in values array. Okay, so this is our step 1. So for this, I will create another for loop. So integer x is equal to 0, x is lower than length, and x will be increased by each iteration by 1. So yeah, I'm doing this, and then I will assign a new value to the values at position x, and this value will be equal to closing price I minus x. So now I basically get my last x number of values, and I store those values into the values array, which is right here. So let's get to the step 2. So step 2 is to calculate the average price. Okay, so how to do this? It's also very simple. So the first thing I have to do is that I have to create a new variable in which I will store that average price, and let's call it mean value. And this will be initially set to 0. So then I will just take this function, right, this for loop right here. I will copy it below the mean value variable, and I will do something like this. So the mean value plus equals to the values at position x. So now I sum up all of the values inside the values array, and I store them into the mean value variable. So I hope this makes sense. And then all I have to do is that I have to divide this mean value variable by the length. So now I get my average value. So let's test this out by plotting the value on my chart, and let's check if this is correct. So if I go here and I deploy this indicator, you can see that as soon as I've deployed the indicator on my screen, the white line is the same as was the green line. Okay, so now if I remove the Bollinger Bands from scratch indicator, you can see that it was basically on the same spot. So this means that we have succeeded with calculation, or with calculating the average value. Okay. So this is the first step and the most easy step. So now we have to proceed to the calculation of the standard deviation. That's not a very complex process, let's say. So step 3. So in order to calculate the standard deviation, we have to firstly calculate the variance of the data set. So calculate the variance. Okay, so it will be very simple process as well. So just watch. So let's create a new double variable called variance, which will be equal to 0. And what we want to do is that we want to create a next for loop, which will be exactly the same as the previous ones. But in this one, what we will do is that we will increase the variance by the values at position X minus the mean value. So what we do now is that basically we take the distance between the average price and every data point, okay, and we get that distance between each of them, and we store them into the variance, or we add them up to the variance variable, let's say. And since we want to work only with positive values, what we have to do is that we have to multiply this by the same value. So we basically square the value right here, and this will give us a positive value to work with. Okay, so this is our variance. And there's some issue. Where is our issue? Yeah, right here. Okay. And when calculating variance, we have to do one more thing, and that is that the variance is equal, or we have to divide the variance by the length value, so we get the average variance. Okay, so, or not variance, because this is the variance, but we get the average distance squared from the mean. Okay. And now, based on the variance, we can calculate the standard deviation, which is even more simple. So ST deviation is equal to math squared root of the variance value, and by doing so we get the standard deviation. So that was pretty simple. And now we can check if we calculated everything correctly. So upper value buffer is equal to mean value plus ST deviation times multiplier, and lower value buffer position I is equal to mean value minus ST deviation times multiplier. Okay, so if I do this and now I plot it here, you can see that it's basically the same as was the original Bollinger Band. So if I delete this, you can see that it's the same. Okay, so we succeeded. So yeah, as you could have seen, it's really simple to, for example, calculate the Bollinger Bands indicator. And yeah, it was a good exercise. So by doing this, you can practice using like different things in MQL5, which is always a good thing, because by trying out new things, you like expand your knowledge about MQL5, and also you really get to understand those indicators. So now, like, you know the logic behind those indicators, and it can help you with your trading. So yeah, just to prove that this works, so I will, for example, change the inputs here to something like 4. And now if I change the Bollinger Bands to the 4 deviation as well, you can see that it's the same. Okay, so yeah, it works. Okay, so I will show you the code one more time, so you are able to check all of the things that I have done. So the first thing I've done is that I've created the double values array. Then I have resized the array right here, and then I have created the main for loop in which I calculated the Bollinger Bands indicator. So here is our first for loop in which I get all of those closing prices into the values array. Then I calculated the average price. Then I calculated the variance. Based on the variance, I can calculate the standard deviation. And then based on the standard deviation and the average value, I can plot out the upper and lower lines. Okay, so this is the complete code. I hope that this tutorial was helpful to you, and yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.